I still remember the day my daughter told me she wanted me to walk her down the aisle. I had known that day would come eventually, but hearing it directly from her made my heart tighten in ways I did not expect. She was standing there in her bedroom, adjusting her dress, her eyes bright but her expression tense. "You'll ruin my photographs with your ugly face," she said sharply. I could see she meant it in a way that was both teasing and serious. I said nothing. I nodded and silently agreed. I told myself it was her day, and if this small request made her happy, I could endure a little insult. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with the usual chaos: invitations, seating charts, menu tastings, dress fittings, and endless discussions about flowers and colors. My daughter was meticulous about every detail, often asking for my opinion and then dismissing it entirely if it did not align with her vision. I did not take offense. I had learned long ago that when it comes to children, sometimes it is better to be patient and silent than to argue over trivial matters. The morning of the wedding, I helped her into her dress. I carefully arranged the folds, ensuring the train lay perfectly behind her. She avoided my gaze, her jaw tight, her eyes focused somewhere beyond the room, as if she were already imagining the aisle and all the guests staring at her. I told her quietly, "You look beautiful," and she gave me a stiff nod. There was no warmth in her smile, but I took it as a sign of approval. The ceremony hall was filled with guests. 200 people had gathered to celebrate her. I could see the nervous anticipation on my daughter's face. Her fiancé stood at the altar, looking dapper and somewhat tense. I walked behind my daughter as she moved toward the aisle. The music began, and I felt every eye turn toward us. I noticed a few people whispering, glancing at the contrast between her poised figure and my own plain appearance. I ignored it, focusing instead on her, wishing I could freeze this moment so it would last forever. As we reached the altar, I held her hand briefly before releasing it. She walked forward without looking back at me. The ceremony proceeded smoothly, the vows exchanged, rings slid onto fingers, smiles forced and genuine mingling in the air. Everything appeared perfect, almost like a scene from a carefully staged film. I thought to myself that this might be one of the rare times life truly resembled the way people imagine happiness. Then came my toast. I had rehearsed my words in my mind for weeks, thinking carefully about what to say. I wanted to honor the occasion, celebrate the union, and yet, I carried a heavy secret in my heart. A secret about my daughter that I had discovered long before she met this man, a truth that she had hidden from everyone. I had tried to forget it, to let it go, but as I stood there, looking at the room filled with expectant faces, I knew I could not remain silent. This moment demanded honesty, no matter the consequences. I raised my glass. The hall quieted instantly. Every gaze turned toward me. I began calmly, deliberately. "There is something important that everyone here should know. Something about my daughter that she has chosen to keep hidden." I paused, letting my words sink in. The room seemed to hold its breath. "She has not been truthful about aspects of her life that could affect the trust and respect in this marriage," I continued. The whispers began, quiet at first, then spreading like ripples across the surface of a pond. I told them everything I knew, the lies, the manipulations, the small betrayals that had accumulated over the years. I did not exaggerate, I did not dramatize. I spoke plainly, clearly, the words cutting through the air with precision. My daughter's face drained of color. I watched as she opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her fiancé's expression shifted rapidly, confusion giving way to anger, then to disbelief. Finally, he stepped forward. I could see the decision forming in his mind. Without a word, he turned, approached my daughter, and in one swift motion, pushed her to the ground. Gasps filled the hall. 200 eyes stared in shock, some frozen in horror, others whispering rapidly to neighbors. My daughter lay there, stunned, tears spilling down her cheeks. The perfect day had shattered in an instant, and yet I felt a strange clarity. The truth was out, and there was no going back. I approached her carefully. "You cannot hide from your choices," I said softly, lifting her hand. She looked at me, her eyes wide, filled with fear, anger, and shame all at once. She did not speak. She could not. I knew then that she would never forget this day. Not the embarrassment, not the public humiliation, not the consequences of her decisions. This was a turning point, harsh and unforgiving, but necessary. In the weeks that followed, she withdrew from the people who had gathered at the wedding. Some friends avoided her, unwilling to face the truth she had tried to conceal. The man she had intended to marry disappeared from her life, refusing to respond to calls or messages. She had to face her reality, and she did. Slowly, reluctantly, she began to understand the weight of honesty, the cost of secrecy. She confronted her mistakes, apologized where she could, and began the long process of rebuilding trust with those she had wronged. I stood by her side, not shielding her from the consequences, but guiding her through them. I could see growth in her, the hard kind that comes only from failure and exposure. She learned that life does not reward deceit, that truth, though painful, is a foundation on which stronger, more resilient character is built. Every time I remember that day, I do not dwell on the embarrassment or the shock. I remember the lesson, the clarity, and the moment when reality forced change. It was brutal, it was necessary, and it was real. The days after the wedding were heavy with silence. My daughter barely spoke, and when she did, her words were clipped and uncertain. I tried not to push her, knowing that forcing conversation would only make her retreat further. She had to face the consequences on her own, but I could guide her through the process, step by step. At first, she stayed in her room most of the day. I would bring her meals, quietly place them on the table, and leave. Occasionally, she would look up at me with eyes that held both anger and confusion, as if trying to understand why I had done what I did. I did not answer her gaze with excuses. I had done it because she could not live a life built on lies. That's simple. She needed to see reality before she could ever move forward. One morning, she finally spoke. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice low, almost trembling. I sat beside her bed. I did not flinch or soften my words. "Because it was the right time for the truth," I said. "You cannot start a marriage on secrets. You cannot protect yourself by hiding. Eventually, it all comes out, and the consequences are far worse." She stayed silent, and I let her sit with that thought. She did not respond for hours. Later, I heard her crying quietly. I did not disturb her. I knew this was part of her process, the moment when shame and fear collide with understanding. Over the next few weeks, she began making small changes. She reached out to friends she had ignored, apologized where she had been dishonest, and began speaking more openly about her mistakes. I watched her, often in silence, proud but also cautious. Growth after such a public humiliation is delicate. One wrong word or action could undo everything she was trying to rebuild. Her ex-fiancé did not respond to her messages. I encouraged her to let him go. "He has made his choice," I said. "You cannot change him. You can only change yourself." At first, she was resentful, blaming everyone else for her pain. But slowly, she began to accept that responsibility lay with her. This acceptance was the turning point. She began to understand that honesty is not just about others, it is about being able to look at yourself without shame. Months passed. She returned to work, reconnected with family members she had been distant from, and started volunteering in a local organization for young women. She wanted to teach others about the importance of integrity, about facing mistakes instead of hiding them. Watching her, I saw a strength emerging that I had not noticed before. Not the kind of strength that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that is built through confrontation, suffering, and repair. One evening, she asked me to sit with her. We were alone in the living room, the house quiet. "I hate that day," she said, tears welling up again. "I hate what happened to me in front of everyone." I nodded. "I know," I said. "It was harsh. But you needed to see yourself clearly. And now you can live honestly, without the weight of secrets." She stayed silent for a long time. Then, softly, "I know you're right. I didn't expect it to feel this real." I smiled faintly, placing my hand over hers. Reality is not always gentle, but it is the only thing that teaches you to be strong in the right ways. By the end of the year, she had transformed. Her relationships were different, yes, but healthier. She had cut off ties with people who encouraged dishonesty, and she had strengthened connections with those who valued truth. Her character had deepened, shaped by experience that no lesson or lecture could ever give her. Her professional life also improved. At work, she became more respected for her honesty and reliability. People trusted her not because she was flawless, but because she was transparent. She had made mistakes, but she owned them. She showed others that acknowledging faults is not weakness, but courage. We began to talk more openly, mother and daughter. She shared her thoughts, fears, and plans for the future. I listened, offering guidance when asked, but never imposing my will. She had learned her lesson, but she was learning it on her own terms now. The bond between us grew stronger, rooted in understanding and truth, rather than appearances or societal expectations. The wedding incident became a reference point in her life. She would sometimes speak of it, not with shame anymore, but with clarity. She would recount it as the moment when reality forced her to grow up, to take responsibility for her actions, and to rebuild trust from scratch. I never regretted my choice to speak up that day, even if it had caused immediate chaos and heartbreak. It had been necessary, unavoidable, and ultimately transformative. Months later, she began dating again. Slowly, carefully. She insisted on honesty from the beginning. She disclosed her past openly, without fear, and she insisted on transparency in the other person's life as well. Watching her navigate love after betrayal and humiliation was like watching a delicate flower bloom in harsh sunlight. It required patience, care, and unwavering commitment to truth. I continued to support her. I did not interfere unless asked. I watched as she built her life piece by piece, each choice guided by integrity. She no longer feared exposure. She understood that truth, even when painful, is liberating. She had learned to live without hiding, to act without deception, and to value honesty above comfort. Her transformation was not instantaneous, and it was not painless. There were setbacks, arguments, and moments of doubt. But each time she stumbled, she learned, she recovered, she moved forward. She became a person capable of facing reality head-on, unafraid of consequences, and unwilling to compromise her principles. The people who had witnessed the wedding, those who had whispered and stared, eventually noticed the change. Some were impressed, some remained skeptical, but none could deny the sincerity that now emanated from her. She had rebuilt her reputation, not by manipulation or charm, but by consistent honesty and accountability. As for me, I reflected often on the choices I made. Walking her down the aisle had seemed trivial at first, a ceremonial role, a token gesture. But the truth I spoke that day had set in motion a transformation far greater than any procession or toast could have achieved. I realized that sometimes, being honest and taking responsibility for what must be said is more important than maintaining appearances, more important than comfort, more important than immediate happiness. She came to me one evening, years later, with gratitude in her eyes. "I know that day hurt," she said, "but it made me who I am. I understand now. Thank you." I held her hand, tears in my own eyes. "You did this yourself," I said. "I only gave you the chance to see the truth. You chose to act on it." We sat together, mother and daughter, silent for a long time. Neither of us needed words. The lesson had been learned, the truth had been faced, and life continued, stronger and clearer than it had ever been. As the years went by, I watched my daughter continue to grow into a woman who no longer feared consequences, who faced life with honesty and determination. She had changed fundamentally from the girl who had insisted I not ruin her photographs. Now, she was deliberate in her decisions, cautious yet confident, aware that every choice carried weight. She began to approach relationships differently, both personal and professional. She had started a small business, something she had dreamed of but never dared pursue before the wedding incident. Her approach was meticulous. She planned every step, consulted others, but never compromised her integrity for convenience or profit. I remember sitting with her at the kitchen table one evening, going over her first business plan. She was nervous but focused. I watched as she scribbled notes, refined projections, and considered potential obstacles. She asked my opinions sparingly, only when she genuinely wanted guidance, and accepted my feedback with humility. Her honesty in business became her strength. Clients trusted her, not just because she delivered results, but because she was transparent. Mistakes were admitted immediately, problems were addressed openly, and commitments were always honored. Slowly, her reputation grew. People respected her for her reliability and sincerity. And I knew deep down that the lessons learned from that fateful wedding day had laid the foundation for this resilience. Romantically, she approached love with a new perspective. She dated cautiously, asking questions, observing actions, and insisting on transparency from the beginning. No longer blinded by infatuation or appearances, she sought partners who shared her values. Some relationships failed because the other person could not meet her standards of honesty. Others thrived because both individuals were committed to truth and communication. Each relationship was a learning experience, and I encouraged her to reflect on every encounter, to understand not just the outcome, but her own reactions and decisions. There were moments when she questioned herself, doubted whether she would ever find stability and trust again. But each time, she reminded herself of the wedding day, the moment she had been publicly confronted with her actions, and how she had survived, learned, and grown. That memory, painful as it was, became a touchstone, a reminder that truth, no matter how harsh, always leads to clarity. I also noticed how she began to support others who struggled with honesty. She mentored younger women at her workplace, teaching them the importance of integrity, of facing mistakes rather than concealing them. She became a model for accountability, showing that strength is not about perfection, but about taking responsibility for your choices. Watching her in this role, I realized that the humiliation and pain of that wedding had been transformed into a source of empowerment, not just for her, but for others she influenced. As for me, I continued to navigate my role as a mother carefully. I did not dictate her life. I guided subtly, offering insight when asked, sharing experiences without imposing decisions. Our relationship deepened as she matured, evolving into one based on mutual respect rather than authority. She trusted me, not because I controlled her, but because she knew I had acted in her best interest, even when it had been painful and unpopular. We had conversations late into the night, discussing moral dilemmas, personal ambitions, and ethical challenges. I could see her reasoning becoming sharper, more nuanced. She was no longer impulsive, no longer driven solely by emotion. She had learned to weigh consequences, consider alternatives, and act decisively. I saw the girl who had once feared a ruined photograph evolve into a woman who could navigate complex situations with clarity and composure. There were still occasional conflicts, as with any mother and daughter, but they were constructive rather than destructive. We disagreed, debated, and sometimes argued, but always with the underlying trust that neither of us would betray the other. Those arguments were opportunities for growth, moments to refine understanding, and tests of patience and communication. Each one strengthened the bond between us. One year, she approached me with a serious expression. She had been offered an opportunity to expand her business overseas. It was a risk, a chance to grow professionally, but also to leave behind the familiar environment she had built. She asked for my opinion. I told her what I had always told her: consider the facts, assess the risks, but trust yourself to act with integrity. You will not fail if you remain honest, transparent, and responsible. She nodded, absorbing the advice, then made her own decision. That year, she moved temporarily to another country to oversee the expansion. The experience tested her in new ways: cultural differences, business challenges, and personal loneliness. But she thrived. She adapted, solved problems, and maintained her principles. Colleagues admired her for her courage and clarity. She learned to navigate complexities with precision, and I watched from afar, proud but aware that this independence was essential for her growth. Letters and video calls kept us connected. She shared her struggles and triumphs openly, and I provided support when needed. Our bond was stronger than ever, rooted in honesty, respect, and shared experience. She no longer feared exposure, no longer avoided responsibility. The lessons from that wedding day had carried her through challenges that I could never have imagined at the time. Upon returning, she reflected on her journey. She recognized the pivotal moments that shaped her: the public embarrassment, the confrontation with her fiancé, the initial resistance to accept responsibility, and the gradual process of rebuilding trust. Each stage had been necessary. Each had taught her resilience, accountability, and the value of truth. Her personal life stabilized as well. She eventually met someone who shared her values, who respected her past and embraced her transparency. Their relationship was grounded in honesty from the outset. She approached it with patience, clarity, and confidence. She disclosed her experiences openly, explained her lessons learned, and insisted on mutual accountability. The man she chose respected her for her journey, not despite it. We often discussed love and life in those years. She asked questions about my experiences, my mistakes, and the lessons I had learned in my own life. I shared freely, without pressure, offering insight, but allowing her to draw her own conclusions. I saw in her eyes the same determination I had seen during her wedding day, now tempered with wisdom and understanding. Our family gatherings became moments of reflection rather than tension. My daughter, once the center of drama and embarrassment, was now a figure of poise and maturity. Friends and relatives noticed the change, often remarking on her clarity, her honesty, and her ability to navigate challenges gracefully. It was a quiet triumph, one that required no fanfare, no celebration, but carried profound significance. When she returned permanently, I could see how much she had changed. Her confidence had grown, not the superficial kind, but the solid confidence that comes from knowing you can face any challenge honestly. She had become decisive, careful, and yet willing to take calculated risks. She handled problems directly, never shying away from admitting mistakes and correcting them immediately. Her new relationship flourished. She was open from the beginning about everything, sharing her past, her fears, and her expectations. She insisted on communication and honesty, and her partner responded in kind. They learned together how to navigate disagreements, how to maintain transparency, and how to support one another without compromising values. I watched them from the sidelines, silently proud. The lessons from the wedding remained a constant reference in her life. She would sometimes mention it in conversations, not to dwell on humiliation, but to acknowledge the moment that forced her to grow. "I remember that day," she said once. "I hated it then, but I understand now. It shaped who I am." And she was right. That day had been a crucible, a harsh test that had revealed her character and forced her to confront herself. Her career expanded further. She became a respected figure in her field, known for her reliability, honesty, and ability to make decisions calmly under pressure. People trusted her not just for her competence, but because she consistently acted with integrity. She had built a reputation that no scandal, no mistake, could easily undermine. She had learned to take responsibility quickly, to address problems before they grew, and to communicate clearly. Our relationship evolved as well. The tension and embarrassment that had once defined our interactions disappeared. We now had open conversations about work, life, relationships, and personal growth. She sought my advice less frequently, not because she did not need it, but because she had learned to trust her own judgment. When she did ask, it was thoughtful, deliberate, and she considered my words carefully. We reflected often on the wedding incident. She acknowledged her mistakes, and I reminded her that the public exposure, though painful, had been necessary for her growth. She had learned the value of honesty, accountability, and transparency. She had learned to face consequences without fear and to navigate life with integrity. The incident, once a source of shame, had become a foundation for strength. She eventually started mentoring younger people in both her professional and personal life. She shared her experiences, emphasizing the importance of honesty and accountability. She encouraged them to confront mistakes early, to communicate clearly, and to avoid deception. She became a guide for others, teaching lessons that I could not have taught in any other way. Over time, she began to rebuild relationships that had been strained by her past dishonesty. Some people accepted her apologies and recognized her genuine efforts to change. Others remained distant, and she accepted that as a consequence of her actions. She learned to let go of judgment from others, focusing instead on maintaining her principles and actions. We celebrated milestones together, small and large. Graduations, promotions, birthdays, and personal achievements. Each celebration carried an added layer of significance because we had endured the difficulties together. We had witnessed growth, learned from failure, and emerged stronger. Our bond, once fragile and tense, was now deep, grounded in mutual respect and shared experience. She became confident in making life decisions, whether related to career, finances, or personal relationships. She approached challenges methodically, assessing risks and potential outcomes. She made mistakes occasionally, as everyone does, but she faced them openly, learned, and moved forward. The transformation from the girl who feared ruined photographs to the woman who commanded respect was complete. Her personal life continued to thrive. She established a healthy, loving relationship built on trust and communication. She respected boundaries and was respected in return. She built a life rooted in truth, accountability, and compassion. I watched, often quietly, as she managed her responsibilities, nurtured relationships, and pursued her goals with dedication. I often thought back to the wedding day, recalling the tension, the embarrassment, and the revelation. I did not regret my actions. Speaking the truth, though painful at the time, had initiated a chain of events that led to profound growth and understanding. My daughter had learned to confront life honestly, to embrace responsibility, and to navigate challenges with integrity. As years passed, we continued to support each other. I offered guidance when needed, but she increasingly relied on her own judgment. She taught me lessons as well, about resilience, honesty, and the power of facing one's own flaws. Our relationship matured into a partnership of equals, grounded in trust and mutual respect. Eventually, she achieved stability, both personally and professionally. She became a source of guidance for others, sharing the lessons she had learned the hard way. She had transformed adversity into strength, shame into clarity, and mistakes into wisdom. She was no longer the girl who feared public humiliation. She was a woman who understood herself, valued honesty, and lived with integrity. And through it all, I remained her witness and guide. I had spoken the truth at the wedding, not to punish, but to force clarity. The consequences were immediate and harsh, but the long-term result was profound. She had become someone who could face life without fear, someone who could navigate challenges honestly, and someone who could lead by example. We would often sit together quietly, reflecting on life, sharing observations, and discussing plans. She no longer feared judgment, and I no longer feared her mistakes. We had built a foundation of honesty, trust, and mutual understanding. The past remained a memory, a lesson, and a turning point that shaped everything that followed. Looking back, I realized that day at the wedding, with all its shock and humiliation, had been the catalyst for everything positive that followed. My daughter had faced truth in its rawest form and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever. The transformation had not been immediate or easy, but it had been real, complete, and lasting. And in that reality, I found a deep sense of satisfaction. I had acted as a mother should, honestly, decisively, and with love even when it was uncomfortable. My daughter had learned from the experience, matured beyond her years, and built a life of integrity. That was the meaning of my actions that day. That was the purpose of the chaos and the revelation. That was the life lesson that no photograph, no ceremony, and no illusion could ever replace. We had survived, endured, and grown. And in the quiet aftermath, we found not just reconciliation, but a deeper understanding of truth, responsibility, and the strength that comes from facing life honestly. After the years that had passed since the wedding, I saw how my daughter's perspective on life had deepened. She had matured not only in her actions, but in her thinking. She began keeping journals, not as a diary for trivial thoughts, but as a record of decisions, reflections, and lessons learned. Each entry detailed challenges she had faced, mistakes she had made, and how she had addressed them. Writing became a tool for understanding herself and for planning the future carefully. Her career continued to expand. She moved into leadership positions not by seeking power or recognition, but because people trusted her judgment. Colleagues knew that she would act ethically, that she would face issues directly, and that she would maintain integrity even when it was inconvenient. She often consulted with me on complex ethical dilemmas, not for instruction, but for perspective. I saw in her eyes the clarity that only experience and reflection can provide. Personally, she became more independent and resilient. She learned to manage conflict without fear, to approach difficult conversations without hesitation, and to resolve disputes through honesty rather than evasion. When disagreements arose in her relationships, she handled them with thoughtfulness, ensuring that communication remained clear and intentions were transparent. This approach earned her respect and strengthened bonds. She began mentoring others formally. She started workshops for young professionals on integrity, accountability, and personal responsibility. Her story, the wedding incident, the public humiliation, the years of rebuilding, became a lesson that inspired others to confront their own mistakes and to value honesty over comfort. She emphasized that mistakes are inevitable, but how one addresses them defines character. I watched her teach these principles, and I saw the impact she had on those who listened. Many came to her with their own struggles, seeking guidance and support. Family gatherings took on a new dynamic. She was no longer the center of gossip or concern. Instead, she was a source of wisdom and example. Relatives often consulted her for advice, and I noticed that she gave it freely, clearly, and without judgment. Her maturity was evident, and her ability to navigate complex social situations impressed everyone who witnessed it. Romantically, she found stability. Her relationship was grounded in honesty, mutual respect, and shared values. They planned their lives carefully, making decisions together, discussing finances, and preparing for challenges as a team. I observed their interactions and noted the patience, clarity, and respect they had developed. Unlike her first engagement, there was no secrecy, no pretense, only openness and collaboration. She also learned to forgive herself. While the wedding day had been traumatic, she understood that the consequences had been necessary. She no longer dwelled on shame, but recognized the growth that had resulted from facing the truth publicly. This self-forgiveness allowed her to pursue opportunities with confidence, knowing that past mistakes did not define her, only her actions after them. Our relationship strengthened further. Conversations became richer, covering not only practical issues, but also philosophical ones. We discussed ethics, long-term planning, and the nuances of human behavior. She asked questions thoughtfully and considered my answers carefully. At times, she challenged me, pushing me to explain reasoning and motives. These discussions were not confrontations, but mutual explorations of understanding and principle. Over time, she became a figure of influence, not through authority, but through example. People respected her judgment, her honesty, and her dedication to doing what was right. She was consulted in professional settings for her ability to navigate complex situations with integrity. Her opinions carried weight because they were consistent with her actions and values. She began taking small risks again, both personally and professionally, but each decision was grounded in her experience and knowledge. She expanded her business into new areas, launched projects with careful planning, and entered new partnerships with transparency and clarity. Challenges arose, as they always do, but she faced them directly, addressing issues immediately rather than avoiding them. As her life stabilized, she also focused on building long-term security and resilience. She saved and invested responsibly, planned for potential setbacks, and maintained a support network of trustworthy individuals. She understood that stability is built gradually, with thoughtful actions, not sudden decisions or avoidance of responsibility. Through all of this, she never lost the lessons from that wedding day. She recalled it not with shame, but as a turning point that defined her approach to life. She would sometimes say to me, "That day hurt, but it taught me everything I needed to know about myself." and she meant it. The experience had instilled a sense of clarity, a commitment to truth, and the courage to face consequences openly. We continued to share moments together, reflecting on her growth, discussing new challenges, and celebrating achievements. She was independent, capable, and confident, yet she maintained a connection to family and values that grounded her. I felt pride not in her accomplishments alone, but in the character she had developed, the integrity she maintained, and the way she approached life. Eventually, she took on leadership roles in community initiatives. She became known for her fairness, transparency, and ability to guide groups through difficult decisions. People respected her judgment because it was consistent and rooted in experience. Her story of growth from humiliation to strength became well known in her circles, not as gossip, but as an example of how facing truth and consequences leads to genuine development. Throughout all of this, I remained a quiet observer and supporter. I did not interfere unless asked, but I provided guidance when necessary. She had become capable of making decisions independently, but our bond allowed for mutual reflection and learning. We discussed difficult issues openly, debated strategies, and analyzed outcomes together. Our conversations became a shared exploration of morality, life, and responsibility. Her life, once marked by a public scandal, had been transformed. She had learned to navigate challenges without deceit, to maintain accountability, and to cultivate resilience. She became a mentor, a leader, a professional, and a trusted individual in every aspect of her life. The lessons from her past guided her actions consistently, ensuring that honesty and integrity remained at the center of all she did. Looking back, I realized that the wedding day, as shocking and painful as it had been, was a pivotal moment. It forced confrontation with truth, revealed character, and set the stage for decades of growth. Without that experience, she might not have developed the clarity, strength, and ethical framework that defined her life. I understood then that truth, though harsh, is essential for meaningful growth and development. As a mother, I learned alongside her. I saw firsthand the effects of honest intervention, the consequences of confrontation, and the profound impact of truth on personal growth. The experience reinforced the importance of guiding, not controlling, of speaking when necessary, even if it causes discomfort, and of trusting that the individual can respond and grow from what is revealed. Years had passed since that wedding day, and the memory of it no longer carried shame or embarrassment. Instead, it existed as a marker of growth, a turning point that had shaped my daughter's entire approach to life. She had become someone I barely recognized, not in appearance, but in character. The girl who once begged me not to walk her down the aisle, who feared exposure, had transformed into a woman of clarity, strength, and integrity. Her career thrived. She had taken on leadership roles, built her business into a reputable enterprise, and became known for her honesty and reliability. People trusted her because she was consistent, transparent, and courageous in confronting challenges. Mistakes were no longer a source of panic. They were opportunities for learning and improvement. She mentored others, sharing the lessons she had learned through her own experiences. Personally, she had found stability and love built on mutual respect and honesty. Her partner knew her fully, including her past, and she had never hidden anything from him. They faced challenges together, communicated openly, and built a life grounded in trust. Watching her navigate love with patience, thoughtfulness, and integrity made me realize how far she had come from that chaotic wedding day. Our relationship, too, had evolved. We no longer spoke with tension or fear of judgment. Instead, we shared insights, reflections, and guidance. She asked questions, challenged ideas, and engaged in thoughtful discussions. The bond between us became one of equality, respect, and understanding. We had grown together, each learning from the other, and the mistakes of the past only strengthened our connection. Sometimes, she would recount the wedding day, not to dwell on the humiliation, but to reflect on the lesson it had taught her. "I hated it then," she would say, "but I understand now. It shaped me." And she was right. The confrontation, the shock, the embarrassment, they had been catalysts for growth, teaching her accountability, honesty, and resilience. Without that moment, she might not have developed the clarity and strength that defined her life. I often thought about my own actions that day. Walking her down the aisle, speaking the truth, revealing the secrets, people had questioned my choice, called me harsh or cruel. But I knew it was necessary. I had acted not out of anger, but out of love and responsibility. Sometimes, the hardest actions are the ones that shape the future the most. Now, as I watched her confidently navigate life, make decisions with clarity, and inspire others to act with integrity, I felt a profound sense of peace. She had survived the consequences, learned from her mistakes, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever. The lessons from that day had carried her through life, giving her the foundation to face challenges honestly and fearlessly. And so, the story of that wedding, the public embarrassment, the confrontation, the shock, the long path of growth, came full circle. It was no longer a moment of pain, but a cornerstone of character. I had spoken the truth, she had faced reality, and together we had witnessed the transformation from fear and secrecy to integrity and strength. In the quiet moments, when we sat together reflecting on life, I realized that what mattered most was not the past, but the lessons it created and the people we had become. My daughter had become a woman I admired deeply, a testament to resilience, accountability, and the power of truth. And in that understanding, I found closure, pride, and a lasting sense of fulfillment. The wedding day, once a source of turmoil, had become the defining moment that guided the rest of her life. And through it all, I had remained her witness, her guide, and her mother, watching her grow, struggle, learn, and ultimately thrive. The chaos, the revelation, the humiliation, they were all part of the path that led to this life, real, honest, and meaningful.